At Christmas dinner, my ex-husband raised his glass, looked at my fiancé, and said, "So this is the janitor? You really brought trash to my table." I just smiled and took my seat. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from." I've learned that the distance between hearts can be measured in miles, and sometimes in the length of a dinner table. Christmas had always been sacred to me, even after the divorce. Even after the children grew up and built lives that no longer revolved around my kitchen, I still believed that one night a year, under soft lights and pine-scented air, people remembered who they truly were. Family. The dining room was glowing when we arrived. My daughter Melissa had outdone herself. A 12-foot tree brushed the ceiling, draped in gold ribbon and white lights. Crystal ornaments caught the firelight from the stone fireplace. The table was set with her wedding china. Ivory plates edged in silver, folded linen napkins shaped like swans. It looked perfect. I had spent 2 hours getting ready. At 68, I don't dress to impress anyone anymore. But that night, I chose a deep emerald dress that Robert once said made my eyes look younger. I wore pearl earrings. Not flashy, just steady, timeless. Beside me stood Daniel. Yes, a janitor. He works nights at Jefferson Middle School. He wears navy work shirts and steel-toed boots. His hands are rough. His voice is calm. He smells faintly of lemon disinfectant and winter air. And he is the kindest man I have ever known. When Melissa opened the door, her smile froze for just half a second. Long enough. "Oh," she said, scanning Daniel from his shoes upward. "You must be Daniel." He extended his hand. "It's nice to finally meet you." She shook it lightly, as if testing the temperature of something unfamiliar. Inside, my son Andrew stood near the bar cart with my ex-husband, Thomas. They were laughing about something, probably golf, or stock markets, or whichever topic men used to measure themselves. Thomas turned when we entered. He still carries himself like he owns every room. Tall, silver hair styled precisely, expensive watch flashing under the chandelier. He looked at Daniel's coat first, then his boots, then me, and that was when he lifted his glass. "So this is the janitor," he said, loud enough that forks paused midair. "You really brought trash to my table?" There it was. Not shouted, not screamed, delivered like a joke. Melissa laughed first. A quick, sharp sound. Andrew followed. Even my teenage grandson smirked, though I doubt he fully understood what was happening. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply set the bottle of wine he had brought onto the sideboard and said, "It's good to see everyone together." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but not the way it used to. Years ago, I would have reacted, defended, explained, apologized for loving someone inconvenient. But I have learned something about humiliation. It only works if you accept the role they assign you. So I smiled. "I'm proud to have him here," I said calmly. Then I walked to the table and took my seat. The silverware clinked again. Conversation resumed, though slightly strained, like fabric pulled too tight. Christmas music drifted from the speakers, soft instrumental carols. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, light and steady, dusting the backyard in white. I looked around that table. My children, the ones I carried for 9 months each, the ones I stayed up with during fevers, the ones I drove to soccer practice in a minivan that smelled like spilled juice and ambition. And I wondered, when did I become the woman they were embarrassed by? Dinner began. Melissa carved the roast. Andrew poured wine. Thomas launched into a story about a new real estate investment downtown. Something about converting warehouses into luxury lofts. Daniel listened politely. "Where did you say you work again?" Andrew asked, swirling his glass. "Jefferson Middle," Daniel replied. "Night shift maintenance." Thomas chuckled. Noble work." The way he said it made noble sound like a synonym for pitiful. Melissa leaned forward. "Mom always had expensive taste. I guess this is her rebellion phase." More laughter. I picked up my fork. The mashed potatoes were creamy. The turkey perfectly seasoned. Everything tasted like effort, like care, like something I once believed would protect me from this exact feeling. Humiliation in a room decorated for joy. "I've always believed family dinners should be about gratitude," I said lightly. "Especially tonight." Thomas smirked. "Grateful for what?" "Early retirement." There it was again. Not loud, just sharp. He was referring to the divorce settlement, the alimony, the house I kept. They all assume I live comfortably, off what he gave me. None of them remember the years I supported his law school tuition. The nights I typed his papers while nursing a baby. The second job I worked when his first business failed. I looked at Daniel. He caught my eye. Not with pity, not with apology, with steadiness. That was when I knew something my ex did not. Strength does not always wear a suit. Thomas leaned back in his chair. So tell me, Daniel, is mopping floors everything you dreamed of as a young man? Melissa covered her mouth to hide a smile. The grandchildren stared, sensing tension but unsure where to place it. Daniel set down his fork. It pays the bills, he said simply. And it keeps the school running. Kids deserve clean halls. Silence. He didn't justify himself. Didn't inflate his story. Didn't shrink either. Just truth. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Clarity. For years, I thought dignity came from status. From staying married. From maintaining appearances. But dignity is quieter than that. It sits upright in a folding chair. It works night shifts. It shows up anyway. Melissa broke the silence. Mom, you always did like fixer-uppers. Thomas laughed loudly at that. I set my napkin down carefully. Daniel is not a project, I said. My voice did not rise. He's a man. Thomas shrugged. Relax. It's Christmas. Yes, it was Christmas. And somehow, in a room full of glittering ornaments and curated perfection, the ugliest thing present was not Daniel's job title. It was their laughter. I glanced at the tree. Under it were neatly wrapped gifts with gold tags. Mine sat near the back. Small. Flat. I wondered if they bought it out of obligation. Or strategy. Because lately, something else had been simmering beneath the surface. Subtle comments. Questions about the house. About my plans. Andrew had asked twice this year whether I'd considered downsizing. Melissa had casually mentioned a beautiful senior community 30 minutes outside the city. At the time, I brushed it off. Now, sitting at that table while my ex dissected my fiancé's dignity like a holiday appetizer, I felt the first true flicker of suspicion. Was tonight really about Daniel? Or was it about weakening me? Making me doubt my judgment? Making me look foolish? So that when the real conversation came, I'd already be off balance. Thomas raised his glass again. To new beginnings, he said, staring directly at Daniel. Yes, I replied, lifting mine. To new beginnings. Our glasses clinked. The sound was sharp, clear. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. No one else noticed. They were too busy enjoying the show. They thought the humiliation was complete. They thought I would go home embarrassed. Ashamed. Grateful for scraps of acceptance. But as snow continued to fall outside and the fire crackled behind Thomas's perfectly pressed suit, I realized something important. They were laughing at the wrong man. And perhaps at the wrong woman. Because I had spent most of my life staying quiet to keep peace. Tonight, I stayed quiet for a different reason. I was listening. And what I was hearing told me this Christmas dinner was not the end of something. It was the beginning. They just didn't know it yet. Dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Forks moved. Glasses clinked. Someone turned the music up slightly, as though volume could smooth over tension. I focused on breathing. Slow. Even. Controlled. Humiliation has a temperature. It starts hot, then settles into something colder. Heavier. It sits behind your ribs and waits to see what you'll do with it. I chose stillness. Melissa passed the cranberry sauce across Daniel instead of to him. A small gesture, but deliberate. Andrew kept the conversation orbiting around income brackets, property values, investment portfolios. Every topic was a measuring stick. Daniel answered when spoken to. Short sentences. No performance. I could see them trying to make him uncomfortable. What they didn't realize was this. Daniel has scrubbed gum off hallway floors at 2 a.m. He has fixed broken pipes during snowstorms. He has worked double shifts when funding was cut and staff laid off. Mockery at a decorated table? That barely registers. Thomas leaned back again. So, do you plan to move in with my ex-wife? He smiled at me like I was an object in the question. Or is this arrangement temporary? There it was. Not about Daniel's job. About my house. I dabbed my lips with my napkin before answering. My home isn't up for discussion tonight. Melissa exchanged a quick glance with Andrew. It lasted less than a second. But I saw it. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. For months now, they've been circling that topic gently, suggesting I didn't need all that space, wondering if maintenance was getting hard, offering to help manage things. Tonight, in front of Daniel, they chose humiliation as strategy. Make her feel foolish. Make her question herself. Make her cling to approval. Daniel reached for my hand again under the table. Steady pressure. Not protective. Just present. I'm happy wherever your mother is happy, he said quietly. No defense. No aggression. Just loyalty. Thomas gave a thin smile. Happiness is expensive. I met his eyes. Not always. The room shifted again. Andrew cleared his throat and changed the subject to holiday travel plans. The grandchildren began arguing over dessert. Melissa stood to bring out the pie. On the surface, the evening recovered. But inside me, something had sharpened. This wasn't just ridicule. It was positioning. And I had spent enough years in this family to recognize when a conversation was being built, brick by brick, towards something larger. As Daniel and I stood to help clear the plates, I caught my reflection in the dark window. Snow falling behind me. Christmas lights glowing overhead. I didn't look embarrassed. I looked awake. Dessert was served with extra sweetness. Pumpkin pie. Whipped cream from a silver canister. Cinnamon dusted carefully across the top, like everything was still civilized. Melissa placed Daniel's slice down last. Smallest piece. I noticed. He didn't. Or maybe he did, and chose not to. Andrew poured coffee and said, almost casually, Mom, have you thought any more about what we talked about in October? There it was. Brick by brick. I kept my eyes on my plate. Remind me. Downsizing, Melissa said quickly. Too quickly. That big house is a lot for one person. One person? I asked lightly. Daniel didn't move. But I felt his attention sharpen beside me. Thomas stirred his coffee slowly. It's just practical. Property taxes alone are what now? $15,000 a year. 17. But I let him underestimate. I manage, I said. Andrew leaned forward, elbows on the table. We just worry about you. Maintenance. Repairs. Liability. Liability. That word doesn't show up at Christmas dinner by accident. I took a slow sip of coffee. I've handled repairs for 30 years, I replied. I think I can manage a leaky faucet. Thomas smiled thinly. It's not about faucets. No, it wasn't. It was about control. About proximity to the asset. About ensuring that whatever happens next happens on their terms. Melissa folded her napkin carefully. There's a beautiful 55-plus community in Brookside. Gated. Security. Activities. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. Except ownership. Except independence. Except the fact that once I leave my home, it becomes easier to sell it. To manage it for me. Daniel set his fork down. Calm. Unhurried. Her house is beautiful, he said. She's built a life there. Thomas looked at him as if a chair had spoken out of turn. This is family business. Daniel didn't flinch. She is my family. Silence. Not loud. Not explosive. Just thick. Melissa glanced at Andrew again. That look, faster this time. More urgent. And suddenly, I saw the outline of the real conversation they had planned for tonight. Humiliate Daniel. Paint me as unstable for choosing him. Then pivot to concern. Concern about my finances. Concern about my safety. Concern about my future. Concern is the politest form of takeover. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I'm not moving, I said evenly. No speech. No drama. Just fact. Thomas leaned back, disappointed but pretending not to be. No one's forcing you. Not yet. The grandchildren began laughing at something on a phone screen. The moment broke apart into smaller pieces of noise. But the air had changed. They thought tonight would weaken me. Instead, it clarified everything. As Daniel and I gathered our coats near the door, Melissa kissed my cheek stiffly. Think about it, she whispered. I smiled. Oh, I said softly. I am. The drive home was quiet. Not tense. Just quiet in the way snow makes everything quieter. Streetlights blurred across the windshield. Christmas wreaths hung from front porches. Inside those houses, families were probably laughing, unwrapping gifts early, arguing over board games. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, he said after a while. For what? I asked. For being the reason they spoke to you that way. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. You're not the reason, I said. You're the excuse. He nodded slowly. He understood. Thomas has always needed a hierarchy. When we were married, it was subtle. He never raised his voice in public. Never embarrassed me in obvious ways. He just corrected me. Constantly. If I mispronounced a word at a dinner party, he'd repeat it properly with a smile. If I shared an opinion about politics, he'd reframe it into something more informed. If I bought something without consulting him, he'd remind me who earned the real money. For years, I called it personality. Confidence. Leadership. It took me 3 decades to name it correctly. Control. When we divorced, people assumed I would fall apart. After all, Thomas was the successful attorney. The one with connections. The one who knew how the world worked. I was the supportive wife. The volunteer at school events. The woman who baked for fundraisers and remembered everyone's birthdays. What they didn't see was this. I handled the accounts when his first firm nearly collapsed. I negotiated with the bank when interest rates spiked. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to keep our mortgage current during the recession. He built a career. I built stability. And when the divorce settlement came, it wasn't generosity that left me with the house. It was documentation. I knew where every dollar had gone. Thomas never forgave that. Not the house. Not the alimony. Not the fact that I did not beg. Daniel pulled into my driveway. The porch light clicked on automatically, warm against the falling snow. My house stood the way it always had. Brick. Solid. Windows glowing softly from the timer lamps I set before we left. $17,000 a year in property taxes. Worth every penny. I stepped out of the car and felt the cold air hit my lungs. Clean. Honest. Inside, the silence welcomed me. No sharp laughter. No strategic concern. Just space. Daniel hung his coat by the door and looked around the living room like he always does. Quiet appreciation. You okay? He asked. I removed my heels and placed them neatly by the mat. Yes, I said. And I was. Because tonight wasn't about being insulted. It was about seeing clearly. They don't hate Daniel. They fear what he represents. A man who cannot be intimidated by status. A woman who cannot be maneuvered by shame. As I turned off the hallway light, I realized something else. Thomas didn't raise that toast by accident. And Melissa didn't mention Brookside by coincidence. They came prepared. So will I? The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Not because I was upset. Because I was thinking. Snow still covered the yard in a smooth white sheet. The world looked untouched. Clean. As if last night had never happened. But I don't believe in pretending things didn't happen. I believe in understanding why they did. I made coffee the way I always do. 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon, slow pour. Routine steadies the mind. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the ticking clock above the stove. Daniel had left early for his shift. Before he walked out, he kissed my forehead and said, "Whatever they're planning, we'll face it together." He didn't ask questions. He trusts me to connect the dots. And I was connecting them. I carried my mug into the study. The one room in this house Thomas never cared about. Too many books. Too little ego. I opened the filing cabinet. Property tax statements. Insurance policies. Utility records. The deed. I laid them across the desk carefully, not because I was afraid, but because I was methodical. $17,000 in taxes. Paid on time. Every year. No missed mortgage payments. No liens. No financial strain. So if this wasn't about money, what was it? Control. Andrew's voice echoed in my head. Liability. Melissa's smile. There's a beautiful 55-plus community in Brookside. Brookside. I picked up my phone and searched it. Gated. Managed. Association-controlled resale rights. Association-controlled. Meaning once you buy in, you don't just sell when you want. You request approval. You enter a system. You surrender flexibility. Interesting. I leaned back in my chair. Thomas has always believed in structured environments. Contracts. Clauses. Fine print. If I moved there, my independence would shrink quietly. Legally. Neatly. And the house. The house would become too much trouble for me to handle. Which means someone else would step in. I don't believe in coincidences. And I don't believe in timing that precise. Christmas. Public embarrassment. Followed by concern. Followed by a housing suggestion. That wasn't spontaneous. That was layered. My phone buzzed. Melissa. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, she said in a syrupy tone. I hope you're not upset about last night. Dad was just joking. I'm not upset, I said calmly. A pause. Well, Andrew and I were thinking maybe we could come by this week. Talk more seriously about the house. There it was again. Not how are you? Not did you sleep well? The house. I stared at the snow outside my window. I'm not moving, I repeated. Silence on her end this time. You're being stubborn, she said softly. No, I replied. I'm being clear. Another pause. Thinner now. Well, we just don't want you making decisions based on emotions. Meaning Daniel. Meaning love. Meaning anything outside their approval. I smiled to myself. I never do, I said. And that was true. When I divorced Thomas, they said I was emotional. When I kept the house, they said I was sentimental. But every major decision I have ever made has been documented, calculated, prepared. They simply underestimated me. After I hung up, I gathered the papers neatly and returned them to their folders. Then I opened my laptop. If they were preparing something structured, so would I? Because if Christmas dinner was stage 1, I had no intention of being unprepared for stage 2. By noon, I had a list. Not emotional reactions. Facts. I wrote them down in a small leather notebook I've kept for years. The same one I used during the divorce. The same one I used when Thomas tried to argue that I didn't understand the finances. Page 1. Public humiliation at Christmas dinner. Coordinated conversation about downsizing. Specific suggestion, Brookside 55 plus community. Immediate follow-up call requesting meeting about the house. When events line up too neatly, they're rarely accidental. Daniel came home around 3, boots leaving faint snow prints near the entryway. He found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, notebook beside me. You look like you're preparing for trial, he said gently. In a way, I replied. He removed his coat slowly. What did you find? I turned the screen toward him. Brookside's Homeowners Association bylaws. Transfer clauses. Resale restrictions. Assessment fees. And one detail that stood out clearly. Family members had priority purchase rights if a unit owner decided, or was advised, to sell. Advised. Daniel read quietly. So if you move there, he began. They'd have the inside track on everything. I finished. And once I leave this house, it becomes easier to frame it as practical to sell. He nodded once. You think your ex is behind this? I didn't answer immediately. Thomas doesn't act without strategy. When he toasted Daniel as trash, it wasn't just insult. It was positioning. If he can paint Daniel as unstable, beneath me, inappropriate, then any major decision I make involving him becomes questionable. And once my judgment is questionable, intervention becomes reasonable. Concern becomes leverage. I think, I said, slowly, that they believe I'm easier to steer when embarrassed. Daniel sat across from me. You're not. No, I agreed. But I had been once. That's what they're counting on. The version of me that avoided conflict. The version that kept peace at any cost. The version that stayed quiet at dinner tables. I closed the laptop. They're coming this week, I said. To talk. Daniel's expression didn't change. Do you want me there? Yes, I said. Then I paused. But not to defend me. He smiled faintly. I wouldn't. I know. This isn't about raising voices. It's about staying steady while someone tries to reposition your life. Later that evening, I walked through my house slowly. The hallway where height marks still lined the wall from when Andrew was 8. The kitchen island where Melissa used to sit doing homework. The living room window where Thomas once stood practicing closing arguments out loud. Every inch of this house carries memory. But memory is not weakness. Ownership is. And ownership is documented. I stopped in the study again and opened the safe in the lower cabinet. Inside were copies of the deed, my will, and something else. A clause added 5 years ago after the divorce, quietly, carefully, with legal advice Thomas never anticipated. If anyone believes I built my life without contingency plans, they've forgotten who kept the books when the firm nearly collapsed. I closed the safe and locked it. Christmas dinner was their opening move. The meeting this week will be the second. They think this is about convincing me. They don't yet realize. I've already begun preparing my response. They arrived on Thursday afternoon. Not together. Thomas came first. That told me everything. He stood on my porch in a tailored wool coat, leather gloves tucked neatly in one hand, posture straight like he was entering a courtroom instead of the house he once lived in. I opened the door before he rang twice. Thomas, I said evenly. He smiled in that familiar way, polite, controlled, mildly superior. Loretta. He stepped inside and glanced around, assessing. People like Thomas always assess. Furniture placement. Condition of the floors. Signs of decline. He won't find any. Daniel was in the kitchen, making coffee. Not hovering. Not retreating. Present. A few minutes later, Andrew and Melissa arrived together. Melissa carried a folder. Of course she did. We gathered in the living room. No raised voices. No immediate tension. Just 4 adults pretending this was normal. Thomas began. We're concerned, he said, folding his hands. After Christmas, It's clear emotions are influencing decisions. Which decisions? I asked calmly. Melissa opened the folder and slid a brochure across the coffee table. Brookside, smiling seniors on golf carts. Sunset over manicured lawns. Words like maintenance-free and community lifestyle in bold print. It's a smart move, Andrew said. You'd free up equity. Simplify things. Simplify. That word again. Daniel remained quiet. Thomas leaned forward slightly. And frankly, Loretta, bringing someone into your life at this stage, someone with limited financial background, requires caution. There it was. Not loud, but sharp. I looked directly at him. Daniel has a name. Thomas ignored that. We're protecting you. No, you're positioning yourselves. Melissa added gently. Mom, you've always trusted us to look out for you. I almost smiled at that. I trusted you when you were 10 and needed help tying your shoes. This is different. I folded my hands in my lap. I appreciate your concern, I said. But my house is not for sale. Andrew exhaled sharply. You're being emotional. No, I replied. I'm being informed. Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. A subtle shift. He didn't expect resistance delivered without anger. You may not realize the risks, he continued. Influence. Pressure. People seeing opportunity. Oh, so now Daniel is an opportunist. Daniel finally spoke. I've never asked your mother for $1, he said quietly. And I never will. Thomas gave him a thin smile. That's easy to say. Daniel held his gaze. It's easier to live. Silence again. I reached toward the side table and picked up a thin envelope. I anticipated this conversation, I said. Melissa's eyes flickered. Thomas went very still. Inside the envelope were copies of updated estate documents. Not dramatic. Not threatening. Just structured. I reviewed everything with my attorney last year. I continued. Ownership protections. Transfer restrictions. Medical directives. Andrew frowned. Why? Because I don't make major life decisions without preparation. Thomas's expression shifted, just slightly. He understands documents. He understands clauses. And he understands when he's no longer the most prepared person in the room. I'm not moving, I said again. Calm. Steady. Final. Melissa closed her folder slowly. Andrew looked at Thomas. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I saw something new at that table. Not mockery. Not concern. Uncertainty. They came expecting hesitation. They found structure. And the conversation wasn't over. But something had already changed. This time, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. No one spoke for a few seconds. That kind of silence isn't empty. It's calculating. Thomas leaned back slowly, adjusting his cuff as if he were resetting the tone of a negotiation. You went to an attorney, he said. Not a question. A statement. Yes, I replied. Melissa shifted in her seat. Mom, that feels extreme. Extreme. Preparing legal documents to protect my own property is extreme. Publicly mocking the man I love at Christmas dinner is apparently festive. I updated my paperwork after the divorce, I said evenly. That's normal. Andrew looked uneasy now. What exactly did you update? There it was. Curiosity dressed as concern. I didn't hand them the documents. I let the envelope rest in my lap. Succession structure, I said. Trust arrangements. Transfer conditions. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. He understands what those words mean. When property moves into certain trust structures, it doesn't pass as easily. It doesn't get managed by eager hands. It doesn't become a casual family decision. It follows rules. And rules, when written correctly, don't respond to pressure. Melissa tried again, softer this time. We're just trying to avoid conflict later. Conflict later. Meaning after I'm gone. Meaning after I can't object. I studied her face. My daughter. The girl who once cried when her goldfish died. The girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. When did practicality replace loyalty? When I'm no longer here, I said calmly. Everything will be handled exactly the way I intend. Thomas's jaw tightened. And Daniel, he asked. There it was again. The real target. What about him? I asked. Is he included? Thomas said carefully. Included. As if love is a line item. As my partner, I said. Yes. Andrew stood up and began pacing slightly. That's what he does when he feels control slipping. This is moving too fast, he said. You met him 2 years ago. I met your father when I was 19, I replied. And I signed documents far more binding than anything I've signed recently. That landed. Thomas didn't smile this time. Daniel remained quiet, hands folded loosely in front of him. Not defensive, not triumphant, just steady. And that steadiness unsettles men like Thomas more than anger ever could. Melissa closed her folder fully now. The brochure for Brookside remained on the coffee table, glossy and irrelevant. "So you're refusing to even consider it?" she asked. "I considered it," I said. "Thoroughly." Another pause. "You assumed I wouldn't." And that, I think, was the real shift. They didn't expect me to research. They didn't expect me to understand HOA bylaws. They didn't expect estate structures. They expected embarrassment to soften me. Thomas finally stood. "Well," he said coolly, "I hope you know what you're doing." I met his eyes. "I always do." Andrew stopped pacing. Melissa avoided my gaze. They gathered their coats more quietly than they arrived. No raised voices. No dramatic exits. But something subtle had changed. Christmas dinner was their attempt to weaken my footing. Today, they discovered I had already reinforced the foundation. As the front door closed behind them, Daniel looked at me and asked softly, "You okay?" I nodded. Yes. Because this was never about winning an argument. It was about establishing terms. And for the first time in a long time, the terms were mine. After they left, the house felt larger. Not emptier. Clearer. There's a difference. Daniel stood by the window for a moment, watching Thomas's car pull away. Andrew followed behind him. Melissa didn't look back. "They didn't expect that," Daniel said quietly. "No," I replied. "They didn't." I gathered the Brookside brochure from the coffee table and walked it straight to the trash. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just decisively. Paper makes a certain sound when it folds. Final. Daniel didn't ask what was in the rest of the documents. He doesn't measure security by paperwork. He measures it by presence. But paperwork matters. And I knew something else now. They wouldn't stop. People who plan in layers don't abandon strategy after one conversation. They regroup. They adjust tone. They find different pressure points. Christmas was public embarrassment. Thursday was legal persuasion. Next would come something subtler. I sat back down in the study and opened my laptop again. This time, I pulled up property records. Not mine. Thomas's. Old habits. When we were married, I tracked every investment, every partnership, every risk disguised as opportunity. He likes leverage. He likes expansion. And he especially likes properties tied up in redevelopment zones. It didn't take long to notice something interesting. The downtown warehouse conversion he bragged about at dinner? Partially. Financed through a short-term bridge loan. High interest. High exposure. Meaning liquidity matters. Meaning access to capital matters. Meaning a fully paid-off home in a desirable neighborhood is not just sentimental. It's collateral. I leaned back slowly. So this wasn't only about simplifying my life. It may also be about strengthening his. I closed the browser and stared at the snow melting along the fence line. I don't jump to conclusions, but I recognize patterns. Public belittling of Daniel weakens my confidence. Encouraging relocation frees equity. Family priority purchase rights position Andrew. Thomas improves liquidity. Neat. Layered. Strategic. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Not urgently. Calmly. "I'd like to review something," I said. We scheduled a meeting for Monday. No drama. Just preparation. Later that evening, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen island with tea. "You're very quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About them?" "Yes." He reached for my hand. "I don't want to cause division." "You didn't," I said. "You revealed it." That's the difference. They didn't insult him because he's a janitor. They insulted him because he can't be bought. And a man who can't be bought can't be used as leverage. Thomas miscalculated one thing. He assumed embarrassment would make me cling to familiarity. Instead, it reminded me why I left. I stood up and turned off the kitchen light. The house settled into nighttime stillness. This isn't a battle fought with shouting. It's one fought with timing. They think they made the first move at Christmas. They didn't realize I had already been watching the board. Monday came cold and bright. I wore navy. Not because I needed armor. Because navy reminds people I understand structure. Daniel offered to come with me to the attorney's office. I told him no, not because I didn't want him there, but because this wasn't about proving loyalty. It was about reinforcing position. The law office sat on the third floor of a brick building downtown. Neutral carpet. Diplomas on the wall. The scent of paper and ink. Mr. Halpern greeted me with a firm handshake. He handled parts of my divorce settlement years ago. He doesn't underestimate me. "I assume this isn't a social visit," he said lightly. No, I replied. It's preventative. I laid out everything calmly. Christmas dinner, public belittling, Brookside brochure, priority purchase clauses, follow-up meeting. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. You believe they're positioning for early transfer, he said. I believe they're creating pressure, I corrected. Transfer may be the objective. He nodded. Then I asked the question that mattered most. If I were to become incapacitated, even temporarily, who controls the house? We reviewed the documents together. My will was solid. But the power of attorney clause, standard. Predictable. Too predictable. Amend it, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. To whom? I'd like to appoint a neutral fiduciary, I replied. Not family. Silence for a second. That will send a message, he said carefully. I'm not sending a message, I said. I'm setting terms. We drafted revisions that afternoon. Clear language. Explicit authority. No gray areas. If I cannot manage my affairs, an independent fiduciary will oversee everything. No emergency sale. No immediate transfer. No expedited relocation. Structure protects stability. Before I left, I added one more instruction. Any sale of the property requires my written authorization unless medically declared permanently incapacitated by 2 independent physicians. He studied me. You don't believe your children would. I believe in removing temptation, I said calmly. That's all. When I stepped back into the winter air, I felt lighter. Not vindictive. Prepared. That evening, Andrew called. I heard you met with your lawyer, he said. So Thomas had made a call. Of course he had. I review my affairs annually, I replied. That's not what Dad said. I smiled slightly. I don't manage my life based on what your father says. A pause. Mom, Andrew said carefully. You're creating division. No, I answered evenly. I'm creating clarity. Another silence. Then, quieter. Are we losing you? That question almost softened me. Almost. You're not losing me, I said. You're losing access. The difference matters. I hung up gently. This was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But decisive. They thought Christmas dinner weakened me. They thought Thursday exposed hesitation. They didn't realize Monday sealed the structure. And now, if they push harder, they'll find something very simple. I don't fight. I fortify. 2 days after my meeting with the attorney, Melissa showed up alone. No folder this time. No brochure. Just her. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, looking around the house as if seeing it differently. Dad's upset, she said. I hung my coat on the rack. Your father is often upset when he doesn't control the narrative. She flinched slightly at that. That's not fair, she said. Isn't it? I asked calmly. We moved into the kitchen. I poured tea for both of us. Same mugs I've had for years. Blue ceramic. Slight crack near the handle of mine. Melissa sat at the island, hands folded. You changed your power of attorney, she said quietly. So the message had traveled. Yes. Why wouldn't you choose Andrew? Or me? There it was. Not anger. Hurt. Or something close to it. Because authority should never sit where there is interest, I replied. She frowned. Interest? If something were to happen to me, I said evenly, I don't want anyone I love placed in a position where financial benefit could cloud judgment. That protects you as much as it protects me. She looked down at her hands. We weren't trying to take anything, she said. I didn't say you were. But you think we were. I held her gaze gently. I think you were thinking ahead. Silence. The kind that makes people decide whether to be honest. It's just, she started. Dad's project downtown isn't stable yet. And Andrew's been helping him. There's a lot tied up in it. There it was. Not malicious. Practical. Liquidity matters. Equity matters. My house matters. And you thought simplifying my situation would help everyone, I said softly. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. I thought you'd want to help, she whispered. That one landed. Because I have always helped. School tuition. Down payments. Emergency loans. I have never refused when it was about survival. But this wasn't survival. This was expansion. I will always help in ways that don't compromise my independence, I said. But I will not surrender my foundation to stabilize someone else's ambition. She blinked back something. Guilt, maybe. Daniel makes it complicated, she added quietly. No, I replied. Daniel makes it visible. Visible that I am not alone. Visible that I am not dependent. Visible that influence no longer works the way it once did. Melissa stood up slowly. I didn't laugh because I think he's trash, she said. I laughed because Dad expected me to. That, more than anything, explained Christmas. Control doesn't just flow downward. It conditions sideways. I walked her to the door. You're not losing me, I said before she left. But I am no longer manageable. She looked at me differently then, not as a mother to steer, but as a woman with terms. When the door closed, the house felt steady again. Not divided, defined. Christmas dinner humiliated a man they underestimated. But what they truly misjudged was the woman they thought they already knew. Christmas feels different now. Not ruined. Revealed. A week after Melissa's visit, the snow melted. The yard returned to its ordinary winter brown. Decorations came down across the neighborhood. Inflatable Santas disappeared. Lights were unplugged. And life settled. Thomas hasn't called. Andrew sends shorter messages. Melissa texts occasionally. Neutral. Careful. The storm passed, but the structure remains. Daniel and I sat by the fireplace last night. No tree now. Just soft lamplight and the steady rhythm of a house at peace. You okay with how this turned out? He asked. I thought about that. Because this story was never about winning. It wasn't about humiliating Thomas back. It wasn't about dramatic speeches at dinner tables. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. At Christmas, my ex raised his glass and called the man I love trash. My children laughed. They thought shame would shrink me. Instead, it clarified me. They thought embarrassment would make me easier to guide. Instead, it reminded me who handled the finances when their father's firm nearly collapsed, who negotiated loans, who kept receipts, who built stability quietly while someone else took credit for the shine. They forgot something important. I am not fragile because I am older. I am experienced. And experience does not panic. It prepares. The legal updates are filed. The fiduciary appointment is active. The property remains in my name, fully protected. No emergency sale. No temporary relocation. No quiet transfer dressed up as concern. And more importantly, no more laughing at my table. Last Sunday, I invited Melissa and Andrew for coffee. Just the three of us. No Thomas. No brochures. No positioning. I didn't lecture them. I didn't scold. I simply said this. I will always love you. I will help you when you are in need. But I will not dismantle my life to finance ambition. They didn't argue. They listened. For the first time in a long while, they listened. And something softened. Not control. Understanding. Because sometimes children forget that their parents once had to fight for everything they now consider stable. Sometimes they mistake calm for weakness. And sometimes it takes one Christmas dinner, one careless toast, to remind them that dignity does not expire with age. Daniel stood beside me that afternoon while I washed the coffee mugs. He didn't rescue me. He didn't fight for me. He simply stood with me. That is strength. Not loud. Not polished. Steady. Thomas called yesterday. Brief. Civil. He didn't apologize. He doesn't know how. But he said, I hope you're well. For him, that is a concession. I am well. I am not moving. I am not ashamed. And I am not manageable. Christmas dinner exposed more than cruelty. It exposed assumptions. They assumed I would choose comfort over clarity. They assumed I would bend to avoid tension. They assumed love makes a woman reckless. They were wrong. Love made me steady. Experience made me prepared. And dignity made me untouchable. If you've ever been laughed at in a room you helped build, if someone ever tried to shrink you to make you easier to steer, remember this. You don't need to shout. You don't need to humiliate back. You don't need to prove your worth to people who benefit from doubting it. You fortify. You define terms. And you remain standing. Because sometimes the quietest response is the one that shifts the entire table. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And remember, strength doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes, it simply refuses to move.